Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. Today we are embarking on a deep dive into a book that might just challenge everything you thought you knew about relationships, communication, and even self-worth. We are unpacking the Ethical Slut Workbook, an adventurer's companion to joyous, sustainable relationships of all kinds.
And it's so important to get the context for this workbook right away. This isn't just a standalone book. It's the companion volume to the massive bestseller, The Ethical Slut. The authors, Janet W. Hardy and Dossie Easton, they saw this profound need.
What was that need?
Well, the original book, it laid out all these really transformative principles, radical honesty, expanding how you see relationships. But a lot of readers, they kind of hit a wall when it came to actually implementing it.
Oh, okay. So the theory is one thing, but practice is another.
Exactly. It's one thing to read about changing your communication habits, but it's another thing entirely to manage, deep-seated fears and change patterns you've had your whole life. This workbook, it's the practical toolbox. It's designed to bridge that exact gap.
And I think it's crucial to say this right up front. If you're listening and thinking this book is only for people practicing non-monogamy or polyamory, you are really missing the universal gold here. Our mission in this deep dive is to pull out those core philosophies, those self-assessment tools that can enhance any relationship structure. I'm talking monogamy, long-term partnerships, even celibacy. It's all about radical honesty, self-awareness, and intentional agreements. These are really just tools for better living, regardless of who you are or aren't sleeping with.
Let's ground this in who our guides are, because their experience is just immense. You have Janet Hardy, who recently turned 70. She's a bisexual, genderqueer sadomasochist, has 35 years of experience in polyamory, and is now in a platonic marriage. And then there's Dossie Easton, who's in her early 80s. She's a queer therapist and educator who kind of famously swore off monogamy way back in 1969.
So you're looking at a combined history of, over 50 years of navigating relationships outside the norm, plus this incredible friendship and collaboration since 1992.
Right. And when they first came up with the title, The Ethical Slut, they've said it was almost a joke.
Really?
Yeah, it was this provocative working title they fully intended to change to something, a bit more palatable for the mainstream market.
But it stuck.
It stuck. And it stuck because their definition is one of radical acceptance. A slut, in their terms, is a person of any gender, any orientation, who just fundamentally believes that any sexual path, whether it's expansive or narrow or even none at all, can be healthy and sustainable and joyful. The key is that it has to be mindfully chosen and freely taken. It's about self-sovereignty over what society tells you to be.
And their advice on how to even use this workbook is our first practical tool. This is not a passive read.
No, definitely not.
They insist you take your time, you mark it up, highlight things, and importantly, use a separate, dedicated notebook.
And that notebook is key because of something they call the free write.
Tell us about that.
The free write is all about accessing your subconscious. It's basically a spontaneous dump of thoughts, feelings, ideas. You set a timer, maybe 10 minutes, and you just write. No judgment, no organizing, no editing, just flow.
So it doesn't even have to make sense.
Not at all. You can write, you can dictate it, you could even draw. The whole point is that it helps you pinpoint feelings that are hard to define. New solutions can surface, and you start seeing connections between things you thought were totally unrelated. It's this immediate, uncensored path to self-acceptance. You realize your inner monologue is often messy, and that's actually okay.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey. It seems like we have to start with a bit of a mental cleanse. They kick things off in Chapter 1, thinking about thinking. The very first hurdle the workbook throws at you is what they call the trap of binary thinking.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, our culture just teaches us to see the world in black and white, X or Y, good or bad, right or wrong.
Monogamous or polyamorous.
Exactly.
And this dualism, it's a really pervasive cultural habit. The authors warn that letting go of it is so difficult because it gives us this false sense of security, of simplicity.
Right. It's easier to think there's just one right answer.
It is, but their decades of observation show that almost every significant emotional or relational issue lives somewhere in that messy gray area between X and Y. The fundamental flaw in dualistic thinking is that it naturally leads to insisting there must be only one right way to have a relationship.
And they point out that you see this even in communities that should know better.
Oh, absolutely. They specifically call out some polyamorous who fall into that very trap, asserting that monogamy is inherently flawed or less than.
But that's just the same binary thinking from the other side.
Exactly. The authors challenge that directly. There are countless happy, mindful monogamists who chose that structure intentionally, and they are, quite rightly, irritated when someone tells them they're doing relationships wrong. The point is, there is no single, monolithic, right way.
And what's so critical here is the link they draw between this binary thinking and the tendency to start blaming.
Yes. That's the scary part. If you believe there's only one right way, then when a conflict comes up, it's frighteningly easy to just conclude that the other person must be wrong.
Blaming is basically an avoidance mechanism then. It's not wanting to look at your own contribution to the problem.
It is. And most of our struggles in relationships aren't these huge moral catastrophes. They're just disagreements. They're creamy versus chunky peanut butter, not, fundamental ethical failings like deceit.
There's an anecdote from Dossie that really illustrates this.
Yeah, it's a great one. She was in a really heated disagreement, and her partner cries out that classic binary complaint, either you're wrong or I'm crazy.
I think we've all felt that at some point.
We have. But Dossie's response was the intervention. She just calmly said, can you think of any more options? And just by challenging the structure of the question itself, she forced them to see that there could be a third or a fourth or a fifth perspective, one that allowed for both of their realities to be valid.
So to help us find those other options, the workbook starts by expanding our language. They call it a broader lexicon for intimacy.
They intentionally redefine these core terms, sex, love, and relationship, to get us out of the constraints of how we usually use them.
Okay, let's start with sex. How do they define it?
For them, sex is anything that feels sexy to the people doing it. That definition completely decenters the genitals. It could be an intense intellectual discussion. It could be a ritual of dressing in latex, writing poetry, polishing a partner's boots as a fetish.
So the action doesn't matter as much as the feeling.
Exactly. The metric isn't what you're doing. It's the shared feeling of arousal or intimacy or connection. If it feels like sex to the people involved, it's sex.
Okay, what about love?
Even broader. Love is simply any feeling that opens your heart. This just liberates the word from only applying to a spouse. It could be the feeling you have for a friend of 40 years, that instant connection with a one-night stand, or that rush of warmth when you call a friend for reassurance.
And relationship.
Whatever connects you with a person who is important to you, your neighbor, a mentor, a coworker, your life partner. The insight here is really profound. When you reserve those words, sex, love, relationship, only for, state-sanctioned long-term romantic partners, you end up dismissing and devaluing all these other vital connections that actually make up the fabric of your life.
I have to push back a little here, though. If love is just any heart-opening feeling, how do you differentiate? I mean, the affection I feel for a charming stranger is different from the deep bond with a partner of 10 years.
That's a great point, and they do address it, but they do it not by refining the definition of love, but by defining the container of the relationship.
Container.
Yeah. The difference isn't the quality of the affection. It's the agreed upon commitments, the shared resources, the mutual caretaking responsibilities. It's the structures you build around the feeling. You might love your neighbor, but you probably don't share a mortgage and healthcare plans with them. The difference is in the explicit agreements, which we'll get into in a lot more detail later.
That makes a lot of sense. So as you start to explore these ideas that challenge the norm, you're inevitably going to start dealing with internal judgment, that gut reaction of ew or that's wrong.
And the workbook advises you to just acknowledge that, take a deep breath, and purposefully put those feelings aside for a moment. The advice is to approach other people's sustainable arrangements with an open, non-judgmental mind. You don't have to like it, you don't have to do it, but you can always learn something about communication or resource sharing from people who have built something that works for them.
And of course, that judgment doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes from what they call the air we breathe, all the societal conditioning we're surrounded by from birth.
And that conditioning is reinforced everywhere. On the macro level, we have legal and financial structures. Think about it. Healthcare, tax breaks, inheritance. They're almost exclusively reserved for state-sanctioned two-person agreements.
Right, so the system itself penalizes anyone trying to build a family structure that's larger or non-sexual or built on a chosen community.
And culturally, the narrative is suffocating. I mean, how many thousands of books and movies have you seen that reinforce this one single path? They almost always reserve the happy ending for the conformers. The queer, slutty, or celibate characters, they're often given tragic or miserable outcomes.
That creates so much shame. And it's compounded by the absolute failure of sex education in the U.S. and a lot of other places. So many of us got our information from, abstinence-only classes, rumors from friends, or wildly unrealistic porn.
Right. The authors cite studies showing only about half of American adolescents get any instruction beyond abstinence and STIs. Forget about consent or diverse relationship styles or LGBTQIA+ issues. The book forces you to ask, if this is where my basic knowledge came from, how deeply is shame hardwired into my natural desires?
This lack of education leads directly to these huge communication gaps. I mean, how are you supposed to state a complex desire or a specific boundary when your only vocabulary is either childish, like wee-wee, or coarse slang, or just sterile academic jargon?
None of them are good enough for real human intimacy, which is why they have this exercise that challenges you to list the words you were taught for body parts and sex acts, and then list the words you use now. And crucially, to notice how you feel about those words. Do they make you uncomfortable? Do they feel powerful, delightful?
And this must be especially hard for trans, non-binary, intersex, and asexual or aromantic people. They're constantly trying to find language that even fits their reality.
It's a huge challenge. And the book's recommendation is actually really simple. Practice. Make a list of the words you want to use and practice saying them out loud, alone or with a trusted partner. They even say giggling and blushing are allowed. It's about gradual exposure to build comfort.
The associated vocabulary free write sounds really powerful.
It is. The goal is to use as many words as you can for sex, romance, relationships, and to pay special attention to the words that express joy or delight. And at the same time, you notice any negative internal reactions you have to certain words. By identifying that negative charge, you can start neutralizing the shame attached to it.
They even look toward a future vision, raising this provocative idea. What if we could develop truly gender-free language for intimacy? How would that fundamentally change the assumptions we all make about gender and roles and communication?
It would be a revolution. I mean, think about the power of language to shape our reality. If you had that, relationships could be negotiated based purely on what works, on attraction, on shared values, not on these predefined expectations tied to gender roles.
That sets up the pivot perfectly. We've laid the mental groundwork. Now we have to move from looking at society to doing the really difficult internal work of cultivating self-sovereignty and personal pleasure.
The authors treat this whole process like an adventure. And before you start any adventure, you need to know your starting point. So you have to start by identifying the pervasive cultural myths you're carrying around with you. These are the assumptions we all hold about how relationships and sex are supposed to work.
Right, the obvious ones. True love lasts forever. Good sex has to involve penetration. The only real relationship is between one man and one woman.
Exactly, and identifying those, that's the easy part.
So what's the hard part?
The hard part is identifying and removing the deeply ingrained subconscious beliefs, the ones you don't even know you have. The authors acknowledge that some of those beliefs, even if they're restrictive, they're acting as internal protectors. They might be saying, don't ask for too much pleasure, or you'll be abandoned, or don't admit you want that, or you'll be unsafe. They're old survival strategies.
That's a huge insight. So how do you get past them? They suggest this thank you free write exercise.
It's a really empathetic exercise. You don't fight the belief. You recognize it. You imagine thanking that protective subconscious belief for working so hard to keep you safe when you were a kid or during a really rough time, and then you just gently explain that its help isn't needed anymore because you're an adult now, you're safe, and you can handle the risks. It lets you move past those fears without making them into enemies.
And moving past fear means embracing the right to indulge yourself. The book makes a pretty radical statement about pleasure.
It does. It says pleasure is not something you earn. It's not a reward. It's not a bargaining chip. Pleasure is something you have a right to pursue simply because it feels nice.
And their definition of pleasure is really broad, which seems key.
It is. It goes way beyond just sex. It includes anything that makes life delightful. Eating delicious food mindfully, having a great conversation, a good laugh, just feeling cool grass between your toes. It's about intentional enjoyment.
The free write on missed opportunities pushes this even further.
Yeah, it asks you to reflect on past chances for pleasure that you didn't take. Was it a trip? A conversation? A specific sexual act? And then the critical part. Would you act differently today? It helps shift your focus from past regret to future intention.
But they're not naive about this. They talk about risk mitigation.
They do. Pursuing pleasure can have real risks.
Yeah.
Social ostracism, relationship conflict, addiction, legal or medical issues. But the key insight is that the goal shouldn't be to just abandon the pleasure entirely. It should be to find ways to minimize the negative consequences through thoughtful planning and setting good boundaries.
A really profound example of this whole journey of unlearning sexual ignorance comes from Dossie's personal story from the 50s and 60s.
It's an incredible story. She describes growing up in this cultural vacuum, no sex ed, she'd never even heard the word masturbation. She recounts discovering her clitoris and having her first orgasm totally by accident one night while reading this very sexualized book, The Story of O. But because she'd been taught that a woman's climax only happened during intercourse with a man, she just dismissed it. She actually labeled herself frigid.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And it wasn't until years later when she met a new lover who was, as she puts it, an artist at oral sex, that she had this realization. The sensation she felt with him was exactly the same as the sensation she'd been giving herself for years. Mystery solved. That self-induced climax counted. It just underscores the immense cultural weight placed on sex being something done to you rather than something you do for yourself.
And that ability to see and validate your own experience is tied to this deep human need for self-image and being seen. We all want to be fully seen by our loved ones, the good parts and the messy parts.
Mm-hmm. And the author stressed that we owe that same kindness to the people we love in return.
Janet shared this beautiful, specific example with her friend and ex-husband. She was stressed out, venting, listing off everything on her to-do list.
And instead of giving her some generic sympathy, he just looked at her insightfully and said, "You need to go bake something."
And that made her feel seen.
Deeply seen. He recognized she wasn't just stressed, she was disconnected from her self-care ritual. He saw past her words to what she actually needed, which was this tactile, comforting, process-oriented activity. She felt instantly deeply loved because the reassurance was specific and actionable.
To help people provide that care for themselves, the workbook has the 15 ways to be kind to yourself exercise.
And it's not about grand gestures, it's tangible, easy acts. Buying yourself a single flower, soaking your feet for 15 minutes, cooking yourself a fancy dinner. The idea is to write these on index cards, so when you're upset or distressed, you can just pull one out. It's like building your own personalized, self-soothing emergency kit.
Moving from the internal to the external, the workbook then asks you to start defining relationships really expansively.
Yeah, to broaden your view beyond just romantic or sexual partners. Include everyone who's important. Family, chosen family, professional connections, neighbors.
And they list all the different kinds of support these relationships provide. Affection, intellectual stimulation, financial support, being an activity partner, helping with domestic work, caretaking.
Right, and when you recognize this whole interconnected support structure, you start to realize that no single person, no matter how much you love them, can be expected to meet every single one of your complex needs.
That leads perfectly to this concept of clean love.
Clean love, it's love without attachment, loving purely for the joy of the feeling, without expecting anything back. It means letting go of that plan we all have for a dream lover, that perfect person we've constructed who's supposed to meet all our needs.
But is that really possible? I mean, humans are wired for attachment. If I love someone, I naturally have hopes and expectations. Doesn't trying for total detachment risk becoming apathetic or distant?
And the authors acknowledge that total detachment is probably unlikely, maybe even undesirable. They frame clean love not as a constant state, but as a momentary intention.
Okay, so it's a practice.
Exactly. It's about being able to take a momentary break from your history, your worries, your needs, and to truly see the person in front of you, the real complicated human, not just the projection of what you want them to be. It's an exercise in presence.
They also talk about the risk of openness, the fear that if you open your heart, you'll be met with scorn or disappointment.
And their conclusion is so pragmatic and reassuring. If that happens, the only thing you've lost is the lesson you just learned. You walk away wiser and better informed about what you want and what you deserve.
That self-worth is absolutely necessary for the next part, navigating spheres of control and boundaries. The book asks you to identify who, rightly or wrongly, feels like they have a say in your relationships. Partners, parents, employers.
And they argue fiercely against the ownership paradigm in relationships, this idea that being married gives you the right to control your partner's non-harmful behavior. The paradigm they suggest is that your control should only extend to what directly affects you.
That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
It is. Your partner forgetting chores. That directly affects you and your home. Your partner wearing sexy clothes that get appreciative glances from strangers, that does not affect you. Trying to control the second one is ownership. Dealing with the first is healthy boundary setting.
Janet had a great anecdote about this. Her partner's metamor, so her partner's other partner, wore this really strong, unpleasant scent.
And Janet was finding the smell on her own pillow. So her solution was a very targeted boundary. She didn't demand the metamor stop wearing the scent entirely. She demanded that the scent not be on her pillow.
So she focused the boundary on the direct impact.
Exactly, and that made it specific and easy for everyone to accommodate.
But setting boundaries like that is incredibly hard, especially if you grow up in a place where your limits were ignored or dismissed.
It takes tremendous internal fortitude, and that's why the workbook brings in the magic wand exercise. It's all about finding that inner strength. You imagine waving a magic wand that makes you as brave and independent as you wish you were. Then you ask, what would my boundaries look like then? You list them or draw them, and then you practice actually saying them out loud to your loved ones, even if it feels shaky.
Dossie has a cautionary tale that really gives weight to this.
She does. Early in her life, she worked really hard to become this desired and sexy woman to attract a man she admired. She wore certain clothes, acted a certain way, she played a role. And it worked. She attracted him. But then she woke up one morning and realized he had never actually met her. He'd only met the character she'd created for him. She identifies this failure of self-respect as this common, painful lesson for young women taught that their duty is to be attractive, not authentic.
That's a powerful warning.
Yeah.
And that authenticity is the bedrock of all this. It seems like the next step is to take that self-knowledge and start mapping out what relationships can actually look like.
The first step in mapping an alternative journey is recognizing the cultural default. They call it the relationship escalator.
Right. This is that rigid, prescribed path society tells us to follow. Date, have sex, go steady, get engaged, get married, buy a house, have kids.
And end up in a common grave. Yeah. It's presented everywhere, in movies, TV shows, from our families, as the only valid path to a happy ending.
So stepping off the relationship escalator is this fundamental act of self-sovereignty.
It is. It lets you form deep, meaningful connections when people you might never live with, or to form core bonds that aren't even sexual. They have this delightful concept of falling in like, where affection is the key, but sex isn't part of the equation.
And the book lists criteria for a healthy relationship, whether you're on the escalator or not. Freedom to speak up, a balanced commitment, attention to what everyone gives and gets, agreed upon ways to handle conflict, and mutual caretaking.
Those are the functional elements, not the legal labels.
Yeah.
And once you're off the escalator, you find this whole menu of alternative relationship styles.
Okay, so let's touch on a few of them. What is swinging, according to the book?
Swinging is primarily about sex-only connections, often in public settings like clubs, and it can involve couples swapping partners.
And fluid bonding.
That's a safer sex strategy. It's an agreement to only have higher risk activities like sex without barriers between certain specific partners while using barriers with everyone else.
Then you have queer platonic relationships, or QPRs.
Yeah, these are non-sexual relationships where the values reflect queerness. Things like intentional, non-hierarchical commitment, sharing life resources, but without a romantic or sexual expectation. Dossie's long-term partnership with Jim, a gay man, is a perfect example. They were deep life partners, they supported each other, shared resources, but their one-on-one bond was fundamentally non-sexual.
And of course, kink relationships like BDSM or Ds.
Right, where the connection is through sensation, power dynamics, or fetish. And what's important is that a kink relationship can exist on its own or intersect with any other style. You could have a QPR with kink or a monogamous marriage that incorporates swinging.
The workbook pays a lot of attention to considerations for established couples who might be thinking about opening their structure.
And their first caution is so important. Change rarely, if ever, fixes a broken relationship. If your core partnership is already in trouble, you have to fix those issues first, maybe with professional help, before you introduce the immense complication of new agreements and new people.
That makes perfect sense. They also dive into the phenomenon of new relationship energy, or NRE.
NRE. That's that all-consuming fire of limerence, the passionate, chemically driven obsession at the start of a new connection. They warn that obsessing over the new shiny person to the exclusion of your established partner it starves the existing relationship. And that relationship starvation is one of the most common reasons open relationships fail fast.
So you can't get rid of NRE, but you have to manage it ethically.
Exactly. You have to be incredibly intentional with your time and resources. If you spend 3 nights a week with a new person, The other 4 nights have to be proactively, mindfully dedicated to your existing partner and your own self-care, even when that NRE is pulling you away.
And to fight that starvation, they suggest the dating for fun strategy.
Yeah, scheduling process-free dates with your established partner, where you explicitly agree not to talk about problems or logistics or work or bills, just fun, playful activity to reinforce why you got together in the first place.
This shift in perspective continues with the idea that relationships are not forever.
Which can be a hard pill to swallow. But life is long, people change, and breakups are an inevitable part of the journey. The power comes from letting go of the belief that an ending means someone failed, or that the person has to be cut out of your life.
They really advocate for keeping exes as valuable connections, friends, confidants. Jenna talks about her friendship with her ex-husband, the father of her children. After their divorce, they kept sharing family meals and supporting each other, showing their sons that love can change shape without having to disappear.
But Dossie's story about her spinal surgery recovery is maybe the most compelling example of this. Her recovery took months and required round-the-clock care. And that care was provided by this interconnected network of current lovers, ex-lovers, and their partners, all staying in the home of a man she'd broken up with in 1979.
That's incredible.
She calls it her army of exes. It just demonstrates the incredible strength of a chosen family that's built from relationships that were allowed to evolve instead of being thrown away.
That network is really inspiring. Okay, let's go back to the need for defining terms explicitly, especially around what sex even means.
This is where so many couples run into trouble because of unspoken assumptions. Janet had this anecdote about a non-monogamous partner who claimed they'd never had sex because his personal definition didn't include their non-genital BDSM play. But for her, they'd had excellent sex multiple times. If you can't even agree on what the word means, you can't build a reliable agreement around it.
So the exercise forces you to get really specific. Does sex include hands, mouths, nipples, toys, phone sex?
All of it. The challenge isn't just defining it for yourself, it's communicating those definitions to every partner clearly and without any shame.
Moving into sexual fulfillment, the book tackles the myth of sexpertise. This idea that sex should just come naturally, and if it doesn't, you're broken.
Right. They say, look, sex is a skill, like cooking or tennis or astrophysics. It requires effort and learning and self-discovery. They say good sex is a journey into this altered state of consciousness. And sexologists have identified 2 essential and often contradictory things you need for arousal. Safety, feeling secure that your wants will be honored, and risked the feeling of being on the threshold of something unknown or miraculous. You need both.
And turn-ons are anything that engage those 2 things. They list examples like taking a warm bath, reading erotica, feeding each other slowly.
Or just touching bare skin without rushing toward a climax. And the most common mistake people make when they're nervous is rushing. The book offers a simple, physiological technique to unlearn that. When you feel tension rising, just stop. Take 3 long, slow, deep breaths, focusing on the exhale. It physically relaxes the vagus nerve and interrupts the tension cycle. It's like an instant reset button.
They also talk about the power of noise, how a lot of people are shy about making sounds during sex.
But noisy sex is often the most communicative and fulfilling sex, so their suggestion is to practice masturbating loudly when you're alone to get over that inhibition. If you can be expressive alone, it translates to being more uninhibited with a partner.
This self-discovery extends to fantasy and reality, and they make a crucial distinction here.
A very crucial one. Fantasies come from our deep consciousness and should never be judged as immoral or unworthy, because they are not behaviors. They live in our heads.
So what do you do with them?
Well, if a fantasy is impossible, like it involves a fictional character, you can explore it through consensual roleplay. But if it's achievable but problematic, involving harm or ignoring non-consent, it has to stay in your head or be confined to a highly negotiated, safe roleplay where everyone's boundaries are protected.
Dossie's personal example of her submission fantasy is a key illustration here.
She fiercely values independence in her real life, but she often fantasizes about submission. So she safely satisfies this need through BDSM scenes with a partner, but she has a hard, non-negotiable limit against any discipline or punishment. It proves you can honor a fantasy and your core ethical reality at the same time.
And finally, in this section, they really emphasize masturbation as self-discovery.
It's the critical zero-risk space to figure out what your body likes. They have this wonderful hot date with yourself exercise. It's about setting aside dedicated time, setting the mood with lights and music, grooming yourself and bringing yourself to climax slowly and mindfully. And part 2 of the exercise is to actively break your self-play groove. Try new techniques, new locations, new toys without the pressure of a partner. It's a safe space to get new skills.
That clarity, built through self-discovery, seems like the essential foundation for the next big step: communication mastery and building safe agreements. The bedrock of all this is learning. And the authors say it is absolutely okay not to know something.
Yes. Never, ever pretend you know something you don't. Faking knowledge can lead to injury or emotional distress, or it just cuts you off from learning.
So they list reliable sources: accurate books, trusted friends, sex-positive healthcare providers, local erotic boutiques, even hotlines.
Knowledge is power, and seeking it is a moral responsibility to yourself and your partners.
But they issue a very powerful caution: do not try to learn sex from porn.
They say it's like learning to drive from watching The Fast and the Furious. Porn is edited, it's professional, it's often fantasy, not instruction. Real-world intimacy requires real-world communication.
Which brings us to navigating consent. It has to be clearly communicated, informed, mindful, and mutual.
They define it as an active collaboration for the pleasure and well-being of everyone involved, including people who might be indirectly affected.
And they list circumstances that make consent cloudy and require extra care: being intoxicated, power imbalances like with a boss or teacher, or just one person knowing way more about the activity than the other.
In those situations, a simple yes isn't enough. Ethics demand you actively question and make sure.
To eliminate that ambiguity in the heat of the moment, they bring in safe words. This is the BDSM tool they argue should be used universally, even teaching them to kids for games like wrestling.
The common color code is simple and effective. Red means stop immediately, no questions asked. Yellow means you're approaching a limit, so back off a bit and check in. And green means all systems go. Safe words are necessary because when you're adrenalized and turned on, how else can you be absolutely certain your partner is still consenting?
They stress that a consent mismatch is inevitable. It's a matter of when, not if.
So you need to have agreements beforehand on how you'll handle that awkward or painful moment. How will you recover? How will you both feel safe again? Will you try again?
They have a free write called Oops, where you practice writing a non-hurtful note to a partner to say something didn't work out as you'd hoped. It builds the muscle for having those difficult conversations without being defensive.
And Dossie's story about her first BDSM partner shows how this can actually build intimacy. They safe-worded in almost every scene for their first year. But the mandatory check-in process that followed every safe word created such deep connection that they dated for 9 more years. The partner even said he missed the early days of frequent safe wording because that vulnerability brought them closer.
That is a huge paradigm shift, seeing the interruption not as a failure, but as a path to deeper intimacy. And this philosophy carries over to their preference for agreements versus rules.
Yes, they strongly advocate for the word agreements. They're flexible, negotiated, and temporary, as opposed to rules, which are carved in stone and inflexible.
And these agreements should be written down, because memory is faulty, and they should be about behaviors, not feelings.
Right. You can't agree not to feel too much affection for someone because you can't control feelings. But you can agree not to spend the night out without sending a text.
They also caution against unspoken agreements, the assumptions we all carry into relationships without ever confirming them.
Those are the #1 cause of conflict. You assume it's okay to have erotic chats online. Your partner assumes it's not. Boom, conflict. Because you are operating under different, unverified expectations.
This is where they tackle the problem with veto power, the idea that one partner can stop the other from pursuing something.
And they say it ultimately fails. Because if the vetoed partner does it anyway, the vetoer is left with the same choice everyone always has in a big disagreement. Stay and accept it or leave. The power dynamic is an illusion. Instead, they suggest finding a middle ground, a solution that's free enough for one partner to feel respected, but stable enough for the other to feel secure. That requires intense negotiation.
The most proactive tool they offer for this is the yes, maybe, no framework.
A really powerful visual tool for defining your limits. The process is simple. You list every imaginable sexual or relational activity. Then you sort them into 3 columns. Yes, I know I like this, I'm good to go. No, this is a hard limit, non-negotiable, and maybe I might try this if certain conditions are met.
And the conditions for maybe are where the real negotiation happens.
Exactly. Those conditions have to be explicit. If I feel safe, if I'm turned on enough, if I know I can stop at any time, if we go slow. Then you share these lists with your partners, and you treat the likes and dislikes like ice cream flavors. There are no rights or wrongs, just discovery and respect.
With that communication framework in place, we can move into the final phase, dealing with the emotional and external pressures that challenge even the most ethical relationships.
This section starts with recognizing your worth and dealing with triggers. The authors acknowledge the deep damage that can be done by childhood judgments or bullying, being told you're too fat or too thin or too dumb. This creates these powerful, self-limiting beliefs about what kind of relationship or sex you think you deserve.
And they define triggers very precisely as a physiological hijacking.
Right. Something small happens in the present, but it involuntarily triggers this dramatic adrenalized response based on past trauma. Adrenaline floods your system, and it hijacks your intellect and reason. Everything feels like an emergency.
And the most important wisdom here is the timeout strategy, a physiological reset.
Step one is just recognizing that you can't resolve anything in that state. You have to stop. Safe words are great here, separate, and take 15 to 20 minutes of nurturing self-care until your body calms down.
And there's a fascinating neurochemical insight here.
There is. Every time you successfully do a timeout, it physically heals your brain. It helps grow integrating fibers in the amygdala that are responsible for delivering soothing neurotransmitters. So practicing self-soothing actually increases your physical capacity to self-soothe in the future.
So once you're calm, you make a fight date to talk about it later.
Yeah.
They also address how hard it is to ask for reassurance.
Yeah, that feeling of, my partner should just know what I need. Their solution is to ask for tangible behaviors, not abstractions. So instead of saying, love me more, you ask for concrete things like, bring me a rose or rub my feet for 5 minutes. Partners should create and share these lists of tangible things to do for each other.
Okay, next up, deconstructing jealousy. They say it's not unique to non-monogamy. It's a universal human emotion.
It is. And culturally, it's often treated as this most intolerable emotion. The one that sometimes gets a pass for violence, the crime of passion. Internally, the book says you have to acknowledge the feeling without judgment. Your feelings are just data, rage, grief, worthlessness. They are never wrong. Only the behaviors that come from them can be wrong.
To help dissect it, they make a clear distinction between jealousy and envy.
A very useful one. Jealousy is wanting the other person not to have something. Envy is wanting something they have for yourself.
And envy is easier to solve.
Much easier. Figure out what you want. More time, more affection, and make a plan to get it. Jealousy is harder because it's often a projection of your own internal conflict onto another person. You try to resolve your own painful feeling by changing someone else's behavior, and that almost never works.
Which brings us to compersion.
Compersion. They define it as the pleasure you feel when you see a partner romantically or sexually happy with someone else. And they clarify it's not the opposite of jealousy. You can feel both at the same time, but it's a source of joy that can diffuse jealousy's destructive power.
Philosophically, they ask, if we can feel happy about a partner's career success, why not their happiness with another person?
It's a utopian idea, really. Taking delight in the delight of others. Janet's strategy for handling impending jealousy was mental rehearsal. Before her partner's ex visited, she walked through the worst-case scenarios. What if he left her? What if they had incredible sex? And she concluded she was independent enough to survive it. And just knowing she could survive the loss was immensely reassuring and lessened the jealousy.
The final internal skill is productive conflict resolution. Conflict is unavoidable, even essential for growth. The goal is win-win solutions.
Solutions that solve the problem for everyone involved. They have these 8 steps to no-lose conflict resolution. It starts with a timeout, then you select one single issue. Set an appointment, phones off, use a timer, 3 uninterrupted minutes each, use iMessages, avoid you messages.
And the last steps focus on synthesis.
Right. Describe your emotions. Repeat back what you hear to make sure you are listening. And finally, focus on a future strategy, not on blaming for the past. The whole point is to move from defense to collaborative problem solving.
Lastly, they look outward at interacting with the outside world, the politics of disclosure.
And they urge caution. The world can be hostile to unconventional lives, and disclosure is irreversible. They stress mindful coming out. If your career is sensitive politics, teaching, or you're in a fragile legal situation like a custody battle, you have to weigh radical honesty against safety.
But if you are safe, there's an upside to visibility.
A huge one. The more people who are out, the harder it is for prejudice to survive. Acceptance is strongly tied to whether people personally know and respect someone in a minority group.
And they note that metamors, your partner's partners, exist even in conventional life as in-laws or best friends. So the strategies are universal.
When connecting with metamors, you need clear agreements. How much do you want to know? Do you want to be friends? And critically, the one rule is, do not talk to the metamor about problems you're having with your mutual partner. That way lies madness. #tag outro.
We've covered a huge amount of ground here. It seems the synthesis, the big win of all this intentional work, is this incredible expansion of your horizons and connections.
Absolutely. Each new relationship, romantic, platonic, whatever, it acts as a special mirror. It gives you new ways to see yourself, to challenge your assumptions, to heal old wounds. This intentional intimacy leads to creating these chosen families, communities of lovers, friends, exes who share resources, care for each other, and offer layers of support the traditional nuclear family often can't.
The author's final vision is, well, it's pretty utopian, a society that honors boundaries over rules, where new forms of families are celebrated, and where no one suffers shame for their desires or their lack of them.
A world where no one gets to vote on your life choices except you and the people you've mutually agreed to be with. It's a call for radical self-sovereignty rooted in deep ethical conduct.
And to wrap it all up, the final exercise prompt is about self-appreciation.
It comes from a story from Dossie about how she was taught as a child that bragging was a terrible sin, so she was terrified of praise. She realized if she wanted warmth in her life, she had to practice appreciating herself and the people she loved.
So the final exercise is, list 7 specific reasons why any partner is, or would be, exceptionally lucky to have you. It forces you to embrace your own wonderfulness without shame. The whole book is about becoming intentional.
And that leads to our final provocative thought for you to take away. Since so many unspoken agreements exist in every single relationship, even the most conventional ones, what is one unspoken agreement in your most important relationship right now that, if you made it explicit and flexible, could strengthen your bond regardless of its structure? Think about the rule you never even realized you were following.